The DA's Ian Cameron is chair of the Parliamentary Portfolio Committee on Police, and he writes on News 24 today, a recent parliamentary reply revealed that over the past 4 financial years, approximately 99% of recorded firearm murders were committed with unlicensed firearms. More than 41,000 murders involved firearms that were already outside the legal system. Fewer than 400 involved licensed firearms. The MP joins us now. Ian, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
First of all, before we get on to the implications of this, how we deal with it, how it changes the strategies that are or aren't in place, where do these guns come from? Is there clear, credible information on that?
So there's a whole list of sources. We obviously know that there are significant amounts of illicit firearms that come from state armories that are either lost, stolen, or let's say procured from state armories. And unfortunately, the police, South African Police Service, lead that so-called procurement process, illicit procurement process. It's a major generalization to make it sound like a whole lot of people in SAPS are involved in that. But unfortunately, the amount of firearms that are often recovered once and then discovered that afterwards discovered that they were previously seized and were actually handed in as evidence at the South African Police Service makes it hugely problematic. And then obviously we've got our different transnational syndicates that trade and procure, transport, and so on, different illicit firearms.
Is it 50-50, roughly? I mean, I was talking to the News 24 crime reporter, Velani Ludidi, just before 4 o'clock, and he was talking about information coming in, lots of guns coming in now from Namibia and Angola, and they're coming in from Mozambique as well, and probably other African countries. Is it possible to put a sort of, 60% are from state armories, 40% from 7 or 8 different countries that are neighbors or near neighbors, or divided up in some way so we get a sense of where the biggest problem is?
Well, let me give you an idea just in terms of law enforcement in South Africa. Over the 4-year period that was measured in this parliamentary question, 166 murders were committed using firearms that once belonged to the state. And of those 166, 142 of them were former SAPS firearms. So it's certainly not 50-50. It's not in the majority that these firearms were previously police firearms. It would then thus indicate that a lot of the firearms come from other illicit networks. And we also know recently that a whole lot of firearms and narcotics come into South Africa from the West Coast or through the West Coast coastline. And recently we also learned about the incredible trade route or part of a trade route that has started being used in and around the Hout Bay area in Cape Town.
So a lot of the firearms that commit these murders are not recovered. So perhaps the statistics are quite difficult to be certain about. But the fact, the statistics seem to suggest that by far the most significant source of firearm violence is illegal firearms. So how does that change the way police strategize to try and get on top of firearm murder? I was reading out earlier this afternoon from Fight Against Crime, Ian, the list of incidents from Friday morning through to Monday morning early today, with the latest incident in Gugulethu. And I mean, it's staggering the number of firearm incidents that there were over that 36-hour period.
That's massive. Look, John, it basically says that 99% of firearms used in these offences are illicit firearms. In that period that we spoke of, I was actually just following up, answering someone. Only 400 involved, licensed firearms. So it should affect the ground level strategy in most cases, or even though it's reactive most of the time, it is focused on illicit firearms. But the broader political strategy constantly seems to be to focus and zoom in on lawfully armed, licensed firearm owners, and that just doesn't make sense anymore. The Civilian Secretariat of Police, their own sanctioned research indicates that the problem does not lie with lawfully armed citizens. Recently, the Secretary for Police from the Secretariat admitted in one of our portfolio committee meetings that parts of the legislation just doesn't make sense and would need to be revisited. Now, just if you look at those two specific matters, it already indicates to you that there's some kind of, I don't know if we can call it a illegitimate or ill-informed or just purely a antagonistic approach to lawful firearm ownership. We don't have another choice at the moment. Government can't guarantee your safety. So if you are willing to safeguard yourself with a licensed firearm, then why would you try and stop that if we look at these numbers?
Yeah, a lot of people tell me, I've had many conversations with Martin Hood and people like that who talk about the frustrations of people, and I don't believe in guns. I would be more dangerous with a gun than without one. But I do think that South Africa's reality dictates that those people who want a firearm and who are prepared to do what it takes to be properly qualified to own one and look after one should have it made, if not easy, but it shouldn't be like climbing Everest to get yourself licensed, as long as, you can't just hand out guns willy-nilly. Look what happens in America when you do that. So you do need some control.
Sure.
Which you acknowledge in what you write on News 24. But if we're going to stop this, I don't know what, epidemic, scourge, I mean, what cliche do you come up with? All of these 40,000 murders committed with how many tens of thousands of illegal guns? I mean, what do we do that we're not doing at the moment? Or what do we do better than what we're doing at the moment?
No, I mean, crime intelligence must play a significant role in identifying the networks that supply these firearms. We think back of the Colonel Chris Prinsloo age, where I still, until today, think that he just took the rap for a whole lot of people. It's physically impossible for him to have sold and traded that amount of firearms almost virtually on his own. But nevertheless, that's the only way that we're going to do this, if we're going to focus on the bigger entities, on the so-called kingpins. At the moment, we make low-level arrests, we make small amounts of seizures with regards to illicit guns, and we don't really get to the big caches of firearms that we should be seizing. And the only way to do that is solid crime intelligence. And unfortunately, even though there are amazing people that work on ground level with some of the stuff, we're not hitting the so-called big dogs yet.
Richard says illegal firearms are all sourced from the pool of legal weapons. That's not what you've told us. So, Richard, I think that has been put to rest. But he continues, it's obvious that if you want to control illegal firearms, you need to address the source. Is there any information about how many of the firearms that are used in the murders in this 4-year period were firearms that had been legally licensed and had been stolen or lost by their legal owners?
I don't have that data in front of me directly now, but I think it's a little bit of a strange argument to make from, I think you said, Richard. The reason just being that there are countries in the world that supply illicit firearms where they literally have factories that build exact replicas of some of these firearms. I recently looked at a case where one person was involved with making a very prominent replica of one of the leading firearm or handgun brands in South Africa. And they very easily supply these firearms. So it's certainly not the case, because that would mean that the large majority are stolen in armed robberies, etc. And when you look at the firearms very often being seized, they are certainly not firearms that came from there. Very often they are not traceable. They haven't been linked to any kind of a database. And then if you go and look at the research from the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime, it indicates that there are over 3 million illicit firearms in circulation in the Southern African region. So it's not that simple to just say it comes from that specific source or originally from that specific source. These organized crime syndicates are far more advanced than what we would like to think. So they aren't dependent just purely on licensed firearm owners.
Ian Cameron, DAMP, Chair of the Portfolio Committee on Police, thank you. Somebody phoned in to say where they're getting the ammunition from, because whoever phones says he has to produce a license at a gun shop when he buys ammunition. I think the answer is obvious. They're getting the illegal ammunition from the same place they're getting the illegal firearms. The trade is illicit, both the gun and the bullets.